right? What makes this new model right? We're all just giving into it, right? We're all just, I'm not all, but I'm generalizing, accepting this, that it's not good to lecture, to go on too much content. You got to give experiential. And but then you sit with these traditional lamas, and I've learned more from them from anywhere. And so I think that what goes on is learning how to learn. I really think it has to do with learning how to learn. I also think from the side of the teacher or the deliverer of the content, that also matters too, because you could be doing it in a way that's not applicable or not relevant. So it is. So there's a teaching component as well as a quality of the teacher as well, no doubt. So anyway, just throwing that out, you guys, that it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that we just accept, don't talk for more than 20. And I see a number of Buddhist classes now that are following that intent. Although I know when I watch, or I know like with Rubina, she does not follow that, right? She delivers content and then leaves you. I mean, some meditation, of course, and stuff like that. So, if you don't deliver content, you sort of wonder, well, how do people get the content, right? And in what we're doing here with Buddhist thought, it is fundamentally, when you get down to the basic intent, it is about practice. It is not about intellect. It is not about academics. And again, here we can say that one of the flaws that we're noticing in as Buddhist thought becomes more recognized and more mainstream is we see that the allure of the academic is very strong, because Buddhist thought is extremely deep. It is academic, it is intellectual, it is rational, and it demands that we have that. It demands that we use our intellect. And this is pretty unusual for a quote unquote religion, right? Most religions are based upon, and again, I'm generalizing, so you can always challenge me, but just so you know that I'm generalizing because it's easier to talk that way. For the most part, religions are based on faith, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Faith.
So I don't know if I mentioned the story of my younger son. So I have 3 kids, and we did not raise them Buddhist or non-Buddhist. In other words, we felt that, looking over the landscape of all our Catholic friends and Jewish friends and all their kids who rejected that, right? Raise Catholic, and the first thing you do is you reject it, and why is that? And it's not 100%, but it's pretty common in our era. So we thought, we really believe that, or I believe anyway, that the product sells itself. When I first moved back to the States in '88, I had to go look for a car because I started getting my degree. And I had to drive over some miles away and to the college, and then eventually to my internship. And so I was driving over what we call over the hill, which is from Santa Cruz to San Jose, Silicon Valley. And I was driving over there, and I was going to look at a Mazda, something or other. And just I saw above the class, there's classified ads, there's no internet or any of that stuff. And on in the newspaper that I had, right above the M was L. And I noticed a Lexus. And they'd just come out a year or 2 before, and thought, I can't afford that. But it was a used Lexus, and it was kind of a teaser to get people into their parking lots, into their showrooms. So I went and I said, I'll try that thing. And then I went into the lot, and I kind of, wasn't, the salespeople weren't aggressive. I kind of wandered around for a while. Finally, someone came out and said, oh, anything you need, let me know. And I said, well, what's with this Lexus? It's rather inexpensive. What is this thing? And they said, well, let's go for a drive. That's all he said. So we went for a drive. And as you know, in those days, it was like a high performance car. And he said, okay, go on, and let's go on the freeway. And then we're going on the freeway. And he says, oh, well, step on the gas a little bit. You can see how the pickup in this car is, and get into 4th or 5th gear or whatever. It was a manual. And then he says, okay, let's get off here and take this turn, see how it grabs the road, and all this stuff. And we ended up back at the park at the what do you call it? The lot. And he said, okay, he shook my hand. He said, anything you need, let me know. My office is over there. And I'm kind of dumbfounded. It's like, well, wait, where's the hard sell, right? And so I kind of stood out there for a few minutes and I came back in. I said, well, I'm kind of interested in this thing. And he said, okay. And he worked it up. And at the end, I did buy it. And at the end, I said to him, I said, well, what's the deal with you guys? You know, where's the hard sell? And he said, we don't have a hard sell. He said, the product sells itself. So that's the idea with Buddhist thought. We don't have to proselytize. We don't have to sell. We have to leave it up to the individual to work. So we do use and do access the intellect. And for some people, maybe that's not so comfortable. There is a way of approaching Buddhist thought in many different angles, and you can approach it from a faith-based approach. But eventually, we're going to have to deal with things rationally. We have to do. When I say rationally, we have to use our intellect. We have to use our intelligence. We have to analyze. We have to research, and the research topic is our own mind and the nature of reality. Okay, so I just want to stress that this is what's happening. It is a psychology more than a religion. Why? Because the intent in Buddhist thought is that the goal, as you remember, of every living being and in fact, we could say every instant, every action, every moment is to be happy. So in fact, if we just think for a moment, you know, it sounds very basic to be happy. But think about us sitting here right now. And if you really think about why are we joining together today, it is because you want to improve something, right? You want to improve something. You want to deepen your level of fulfillment. You want to deepen your level of meaning. You want to deepen your level of connection with others. You want to deepen your connection with yourself. You want to develop a more healthy mind. So those are all synonyms for you want to be happy. And if you think that each movement that we make really is each movement, even drinking your water, Catherine, you know, is because you want, you know, if you can go with extend what it means, I'm saying Catherine took a drink of water to be happy. Well, okay, that sounds a little simplistic. But I don't want it to be simplistic. I want it to be because Catherine had some discomfort in her throat, in her mouth. And so we spend our entire life, each instant, and this is what we want to meditate on throughout the week or reflect on. Each instant is spent avoiding discomfort. In a way, it's sometimes to say each instant is spent trying to experience pleasure, which is synonymous with happiness for us regular people. Pleasure and happiness from the Buddhist philosophical and psychological approach are not at all the same. Okay? It's not that they're not the same. And this is where we have a breakdown in our modern culture, modern society, where we don't have the correct information in terms of what Lama Yeshe is speaking about in ego, attachment, and liberation. Happiness is something where the ego gets satisfied. And that satisfied is according to its definition of satisfaction, not a universal one. So, for example, for Lewis, his ego looks to be satisfied by, maybe you're a bit of a scientist, aren't you? Yeah. So he investigates science. He's trying to make sense of the world through a scientific approach, whatever you want to say. So that's for his. But when you think about it, does that provide the happiness the Buddhist thought is suggesting? So in Buddhist thought, okay, this is where the breakdown happens, or the division happens, I should say. So let's all get on this. Let's all be in agreement here. What Buddha discovered, and Buddhism arose from what Buddha discovered, is that there can be what's called a lasting happiness. So this is not something for really, in fact, it's not something for the temporary happiness. It's not rejecting temporary. Of course, it's not like we should be suffering and tortured, right? Martyrs for some future happiness. It doesn't mean like that either. It just says, basically what Buddha's teaching is that the way we approach our happiness is incorrect. Not only is it incorrect, it's the opposite of what produces happiness. When we get comfortable with that concept, then the investigation in the Buddhist ideas becomes much more rich. It becomes fascinating. It's like, okay, so we have to, last week we talked about that there is a level of contentment, happiness, fulfillment that is in our possession, but we don't access. It's in our possession in the sense of potential, by the way, not in our possession like sometimes we think like the soul, or like sometimes you hear things people say that your Buddha nature. And due to our training, we think Buddha nature is like there's some little Buddha sitting in there, right? And we're just going to uncover him, her, it. So this is the disappointing thing about Buddha. It's not like that. It's a potential. It's a potential that, and as we get more and more into Buddhist philosophy and psychology, it's so fascinating because we don't just say there's the potential, the Buddha nature in us is a potential. We don't just say that. We explain it scientifically, psychologically, philosophically, what that means. And then you and I take it away and we digest it, we investigate it, we analyze it, and we put it to tests of logic and reasoning, and then move forward. So everything can be not everything eventually can be reduced to understanding through understanding. Okay. Now there are some very subtle topics that are really hard to understand through logic. There are a couple of really, really tough ones. One of them being karma. Okay, which we won't go into at the moment. So just so you know that there's like 3 levels of subtlety. And some of the topics are very subtle. And this has to do with when we talk about, even in the common world, it's easy, it's easy to perceive a desk. You see it, yes, there's a desk. You can know a desk. So that's considered the grossest form of knowing. Then there's subtle knowing, which is like there's a desk and the light is behind it. It must be casting a shadow, right? You can't see the shadow, but you can infer a shadow, right? So that's another way. And a little bit like we can infer there's a planet out there because we see the gravitational pull movement of the different planets and things like that. That's considered something that's subtle, but it still can be observed. It can be now very subtle. It can only be directly observed by a very subtle mind. Like, for example, we can't see the cancer in our body, right? We can't see that, but instruments maybe consider or can deduce that it's there. So even, I guess as subtle would be through instruments. Then very subtle would be something like only can be assumed through direct experience. Okay, only can be not assumed, but it can only be known through direct experience. Okay, Lewis, can we perceive the space between the molecules? Is that something that instruments can perceive, or is it?
I do know that with certain tunneling microscopes, you can actually see the molecules, right, but you cannot see the space between them.
Okay, so that would be a pretty good analogy for what we're talking about is very subtle reality. Karma or cause and effect is one of those. Okay. Okay. And by the way, if you ever have questions, please interrupt me or raise your hand or something. Okay. Because I like to have the interactive stuff. I'm going to go to a screen share, if that's okay. I'm going to do it anyway if it's not okay. Even though I said an hour is a good length, it's never enough either. Okay. So as long as we're jumping off from this shared understanding that the mind, okay, let's not say, so there is a potential within a human being. And actually the potential is within every sentient being, every being with mind, But the capacity to actualize that potential primarily exists within humans. It's interesting. So our human brain or our human constitution is made up in a particular special way that we have the facility, the opportunity, the ability to access the potential of the mind. Now, unfortunately, 99% of the humans don't do that. I don't know what percent, but it's a rare thing. And example would be, those aha experiences that you have or people have. I mentioned, I think last week, through meditation or through walking and being in nature, or even giving birth to your child, falling in love, psychedelics, where you have a direct experience of something that's nonverbal, right? You can't explain it. Someone asks you, you say, "Oh, I fell in love with someone," and you say, "Well, what is love?" You can't really describe it, can you? I mean, you describe it, but it's not it. And so that is reflective of the potential, kind of like deja vus, or people see past lives or remember their past. That kind of stuff all comes from the potential of the human mind, and we have not accessed that. Some people access a little more, some don't even close to accessing it, and we live through life and never access it and never seek to access it, and then we die. So that's where Buddha was teaching that the spiritual path and happiness is from accessing that potential. Okay? Through accessing that potential. I think all religions say the same thing in different ways. Okay? But it gets lost. Like in Christianity, that potential is more projected outside of us into heaven and God. In Buddhism, it's projected internally. It's an internal quality of our mind. Yes, it's undeveloped. And like we spoke last week, when it begins to develop, everything changes. Everything changes. Okay? So when we look at our day and when we look at our life, this is where we want, when we get off this class today, and I think last week I asked you the same, we really want to take a look at how these teachings, these ideas, these concepts, these theories, they're not just philosophy. We have to find a way that they relate to our everyday experience. The problem is we're not used to looking at our everyday experience. And in the spiritual path here is not so much at all, really looking outside at our daily experience. Like I'm looking at the trees outside my window and, looking at the class we're going to have. It's looking at spending the whole time, become more and more interested and engaged with looking at our inner day, our inner life. Okay. What's the mind doing? So we become students of the mind. That's how we begin to understand our day. Okay. The ups, the downs, what it does, how it makes sense, what's it doing. We really don't know. We've had this mind since, a long time, but at least from the moment we're born, but we don't really know how it functions, do we? We don't know. Let me ask you, I'll go off screen share for a second here. Okay. So for example, we've had the mind since we're born, or even from beginningless time, according to Buddhist thought. So if we've had the mind that long, we should know what it is, right? So one question I have, is the mind made up of atoms and molecules or not? Or something else? Are you waiting for me to answer that, or? Well, you can say, I don't know. I don't know is an answer.
The mind is seen as clear and knowing, right? So it's not physical matter.
Okay, right. Does everyone know that? And Tenzin, though, you heard that from some teachings, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So until you heard that, what did you think?
I don't think I thought.
So generally speaking, how is the mind understood generally by people? As Tenzin said, I'll go back to what Tenzin said in just a second. But generally speaking, how do people, yeah, Lewis?
Generally speaking, mind is just considered a collection of electrical impulses traveling along a circuit, a neural network in your brain.
Right. Someone has some background noise going on. I know. Yvonne,
Oh, that was me. I'm sorry.
Oh,
My dog has kennel cough.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So-
Okay.
So every time I unmute, you're going to hear him cough.
Right. Okay. So what I think the way Lewis described it is correct. So Lewis, electrical impulses, neural firing and neurons and right.
Yes.
So that is that's the generally and in fact increasing understanding of what the mind is, particularly amongst certain schools of psychologists, correct?
Yeah.
So with that description, that means the mind and brain are sort of synonymous, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then therefore the mind in that description is physical.
It's composed of matter and energy. It's physical.
Yeah. Okay. So things are either, well, we say in Buddhist science, either form or formless. So in that case, we're talking about its form because it's made up of atoms and molecules, and yeah. So that's the pretty common description of the mind. And so the mind is then form, not formless, according to that description.
Yes.
So in the Buddhist psychology and with science, as Tenzin pointed out, well, first of all, it's interesting. We've had that mind since we were born, and since millennia, since the beginning of this time, science could have researched this more, and they have only coming up with this sort of working hypothesis now. It's kind of odd. In Buddhist philosophy psychology, they came up with the hypothesis, 2,500 years ago. And in that description, the mind is, as Tenzin pointed, it is the definition of mind is that it's clear or luminous and cognizes or knows, experiences. So when I'm so right now I'm looking at my screen and I see all your pictures and stuff like that. I'm experiencing, aren't I? And you're listening to my voice and you're experiencing, correct? That experiencer is not your ear. Okay? That experiencer is your mind. Okay. And that that experiencer is in the nature of clarity. And cognizing, and it has qualities such as it's non-atomic, so it's formless, and it is in a state of movement. It's impermanent, not permanent. It's not static, it's fluid. Okay, so and it's also eternal, backwards and forward. In other words, you can't trace a beginning to it, which again, there we go into the very subtle knowledge, but it's actually not, so if it's impermanent, so we have definitions for everything, and I don't want to get too technical on everybody, but the definition of impermanent, I'll try to keep you in the conversation, don't get too nervous. The definition of impermanent is that which is produced. In other words, cause and effect. Cause and effect. You have a cause, you experience the effect. Then rise another cause to another effect. And it's an endless. So when we can see, now this is something we can experience by watching the mind. And then you get more subtle, and you can see the progression of mind. And we'll do that in just a second, okay? So you see the progression of mind. It's moving. For something to move, this is what's so weird. We don't think about this much in just common everyday language, but for something to move, another way of saying that is there's an arising, an abiding, and a ceasing, right? Another arising, abiding, and ceasing. And then if you try and collapse the arising, there's an arising, abiding, and ceasing of the arising. Like, in other words, time just keeps. You can't find exactly where anything's sitting still, is it? Is anything sitting still or not in our minds? Anything sitting still in the world around us? If it's not sitting still, then it's moving all the time. And it's moving all the time. You can't put your finger on now, can you? We think we can, theoretically, intellectually. But in fact, the moment you point to now, it's gone. All right. So I want to just spend a few minutes, and then I'm going to go to another part of the presentation I've prepared for today. I'm all over I'm not all over the place, but I'm kind of all over the place. So let's just sit for a moment. Gently close your eyes, just to make sure that your back is straight, not rigid, but straight. And there's other things in the posture which I won't go into right now. The main thing is that your back is straight, head is just slightly bent, but everything's straight line from the crown of your head to your coccyx. And now bring every attention inward and just watch the in and out of the breath for a few moments. And on the exhalation of the breath, count 1. Next exhalation, count 2. And when you get to 10, then start counting and then do it backwards. And this is just to calm the mind. I want you to reflect, connect with the person who, when you started this meditation, go back in time a little bit and see her, see him, and then see the progression from that person to the moment now, to you now. You get a feeling of movement. And go back to when we started the hour. Just take a little view as if you're watching a film of yourself from when we met today to now. Just review it from the past to the present. And I'll go back to when you got up today. From the past to the present. Just be gentle, you can do it gently. You don't have to rush. Not too slow, not too fast. Just observing. As if you're watching a movie. Now come into the present. Now go back to when I first asked you these questions. And now. Has there been movement from even 3 or 4 minutes ago to now? Everything's been changing, actually. To get to here demanded things change, or in change. If they're not in change, then who we are at this moment is the same as who we were a few minutes ago, right? Did things change or were they static? So one thought gives rise to the next thought. Even the atoms, the physical part, give rise to the next atoms. And as a thought to take in when you leave, when your consciousness started, at the time of when the sperm and the egg joined, is that when you started your consciousness? Or doesn't there have to be progression of cause and effect? So what was happening before the first instant you entered the egg and the sperm? Or did it just happen spontaneously, without a cause, without a progression? Okay. That's your work for this coming week. Okay. Were there any questions before I'm gonna build on that now in terms of content? No questions? Okay. So when we talk about ego, let's talk about what this means, this ego, okay? So I tried to extract stuff from Lama's words and then also put my own understanding of it. So Lama says that the ego binds me to conditions. Okay. This is a very important point, and it becomes more and more subtle. What gets more and more subtle is that there's nothing, when it says ego binds me to conditions, it means the ego is always attaching itself to conditions. It doesn't exist on its own, even though it seems like it does. So there's always a relationship. So it goes on, this Lama goes on, it gives me no chance to experience internal peace, freedom, and joy. So I say analyze this, don't just accept, meaning when we talk about, when we're looking at internal peace, freedom, and joy, we have to be, what we're becoming familiar with as we watch our life and day to day and during the week, is we have to become familiar with the fact that from our potential, the potential, we do not experience internal peace, freedom, and joy. Particularly, and takes time to come to terms with how our minds are functioning. And so, because the mind is always moving from one thing to the next, looking for this sense of pleasure or comfort and avoiding discomfort, that is not the definition of peace. That is the opposite of internal peace. Do you see what I'm saying? So as long as the mind is constantly involved in trying to get it better, or trying to get it comfortable, or trying to avoid the discomfort, as long as it's always, that's what it's doing. That's what Lama refers to as the ego. Okay, so the ego is constantly looking for that kind of satisfaction, that kind of pleasure, that kind of happiness. And so therefore, real happiness, as defined in Buddhist thought, and also we have to analyze if that's real happiness, is a balance of internal peace. It's a balance of, it's where the mind is just comfortable. The mind is relaxed. It's free. It's not controlled. Okay. Now we're completely under the control. We have no control, actually. We have no control, because the moment something occurs in our vision or in our, we just run towards it, or we run away from it. As long as we're compelled to run towards something or compelled to run away from something, that's not the definition of freedom. That's me under the control of something else. Freedom means that we're in control. So the ego is the cause of all of our problems and all the world's problems. This Lama says Buddhism is not about sweet words. The ego is about sweet words. The ego is about comfort and pleasure. It doesn't achieve anything lasting. So again, it's very important to continue to become familiar with the idea of what we're talking about in terms of what we're trying to achieve of happiness. It's something that lasts. Okay. Ego and just a normal world is everything we do almost is acquiring or experiencing things that don't last. Okay. So the idea is that if we're truly happy, if something truly causes happiness, then it lasts. The fact that it doesn't last, that experience of it fading away and losing it, that's a indication of unhappiness. Okay, lack of freedom, lack of peace, lack of joy. Okay. One thing I noticed, and I just draw your attention to it because I'm a bit of a cynic sometimes, is as Buddhism has become more available, is I seem to notice, I want people to do some research about this. And I said this last week, that, hang on just a second. That as we look into what's happening, all the availability of Buddhist books and online teachings and online practices and online programs. So I'm a bit of a old school. I am old school, traditional. What I'm trying to say is that what makes something Buddhist? So if it feels good, is that, when I say Buddhist, I'm not talking about the religion, I'm talking about awakening. Okay, so ultimately, when we say a Buddhist practice, it's a practice that should lead to awakening. Now, we very much accept that some practices, much of what we do isn't about awakening in this moment. It's about creating the conditions to awaken, right? If I decide to become a monk, becoming a monk, I'm not going to become awakened from that, probably. Although many people think that they see monks and they think they're enlightened, but monks are nuns. But the fact is, no, I'm becoming a monk in order to support my awakening, right? So granted, I'm going to meditate this morning. I'm probably not going to attain awakening, but I'm training the mind to prepare the ground so they can become awakened, right? You can't just snap your fingers and it's going to happen. However, when we see what makes something a Buddhist or an awakening practice or not, what defines it as an awakening practice? And again, something to become comfortable with, it's the intention behind what you do, not the practice. So we cannot say he or she, or I saw this Buddhist meditation. That's what's happening today. Buddhist meditation, Buddhist practice, a Buddhist ritual, a Buddhist teaching. So I'm warning you to be skeptical. Be skeptical, because there's a lot out there that claims to be Buddhist. Now, for something to be positive is great. If being positive, if you give someone a compliment, it's positive. But positive is not synonymous with awakening. Okay? Positive is not synonymous with awakening. What makes something an awakening practice or action or not is our intention. It's our intention. Okay? And if people tell you that they're practicing Buddhist mindfulness, it's a misnomer. There's no such thing as Buddhist mindfulness from that point of view. Of course, it arose from Buddhist teachings. I get that. We can say that. But what makes it Buddhist or not Buddhist is the intention of why they're practicing mindfulness. Is it to train the mind, right? Is it to train the mind so that you can become a more fertile person to open up your human potential of awakening? Then it's a Buddhist practice. Or you're practicing mindfulness so that people will think that you're really cool and you're doing what everyone else is doing. And, besides, it feels good. Nothing wrong with that, right? We wouldn't say that's negative, except for the part about people thinking you're cool or whatever. But, feel good is not negative. It's probably better than the alternative of, whatever else you would do instead. Okay? So these can be stepping stones, but they're not. They don't have the depth yet of the actual practice of the focus of awakening. The word Buddha means awakened one. So Buddhism is the path of awakening. And the only way to judge whether you engage in the path of awakening is in intention. Okay. And we're seeing a lot of the other stuff. This is because of the nature of our world these days of being very commercialized and materialistic, right? It's getting more so all the time. So of course you would take a spiritual path like Buddhism and people would make it just apply the same materialistic mindset to it. That's understandable. As Trungpa Rinpoche called it, spiritual materialism, remember? So this is pretty big. It's exploded. And again, I'm not saying it's all negative. I wouldn't say negative, or I can't say negative. I can just say that it's not really very different. What's the difference between that and taking psychedelics? Doing one young friend who went, I think, to Brazil for an ayahuasca, experience, where you go in these places. You can't say it's bad, right? The effect can be good. It was on him. It was very positive for him. Actually, he had been to the November course some years ago, which is the meditation course in Nepal. And I don't know how deeply he got the material, but when he went to do this Iwasku experience, he came back and reported to us as, now I understand the Lam Rim. Wow, it's really profound, like that. So it was positive. It was good. So we can't judge the action, is what I'm trying to say. Difficult. So it comes down to intention. Okay. Where was I? Share screen. Okay, so this is about the ego. It doesn't achieve anything lasting. So this is what we want to stay focused on, okay? We're talking about lasting, meaningful, deep. To follow the ego is to pursue pleasure and avoid discomfort. These are the things, this is from traditional Buddhist teaching, that this is where we spend most of our life. If you think about throughout the day, and maybe you can remember these points and just check out throughout your week, how much of your time you're spending seeking pleasure or avoiding discomfort? How much of the time how much of our energy is concerned about praise and compliments in avoiding criticism and blame? Very hard to take criticism, isn't it? For most people. And then most of the meaning of life, and you can check around, look at all the advertising and even our universities and our, the whole thing about going to college or creating a career. It's about creating abundance and more, okay? It's in contradistinction to the fear of poverty and lacking. None of us want that. And that the point of this, not that these are good or bad, it's this is where we spend our time. This is where we spend our intention. This is where we spend our meaning. How about that? And then notoriety and renown or fame. And we spend a lot of time avoiding ill repute and a bad name. I mean, all the court cases, all the things about legalized, it's all, not all, it's a lot of it is about this exact thing, So this is what we think of as a meaningful life, but the real purpose is to refocus our intentions on a meaningful life, okay? And for most, this is a meaningful life, and that's too bad. And so we just begin to investigate, begin to be honest with ourselves, and we need to have a kind of a introspective, reflective attitude about what we're doing with our life. How do we make it meaningful? Okay. So, by the way, in terms of Buddhist language, Buddhist philosophy and psychology, they don't use the word ego. I mean, not in that sense. Ego, what's used is, just to give you the traditional explanation, is that the mind is both, the mind in actuality is pure. It's actually pure, but it's obscured by, in the metaphor, it's like the sky is clear, but obscured by smog or clouds or smoke, that kind of thing. So that's how our mind is. Our mind is actually clear and pure, but what's the problem is that we have all these clouds moving through our mind, the cloud of attachment, the cloud of anger, the cloud of jealousy, the cloud of pride, the cloud of insecurity, the cloud of anxiety, the cloud of depression, the cloud of distraction, the cloud of pleasure. Okay. And where all those clouds come from, and this is going technical, but we have to do this for a minute, is where this actually comes from is through perceiving. When we perceive, our mind is saturated by ignorance. And ignorance in this case means not seeing things as they are. Okay. What did Anais Nin say? We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. It's like that. Okay. So we don't actually see our friend, really, our partner. We see through a veil, a cloud. The ignorance projects all this stuff onto our friend, onto your desk, onto your screen, onto your outdoors there onto your body. That's how, so there's this whole quality. So that's what Lama Yeshe is calling ego. Okay, that's what Lama Yeshe is calling ego. And I think, Barbara, did you have a question? I saw your hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, I did have a question, and I'm taking us back a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
You had said that it's all about intention.
Yeah.
Is it about intention or is it about motivation?
Same thing. I'm using them synonymously.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
They're probably not synonymous, but anyway, yes, I'm using them synonymously. Yeah. When we to further deeper into the map of the mind, the mind is always present, and it never is not there, and it has 5 qualities that are always accompanying the mind, always, and like attention and contact, feeling, and intention. So intention, funny thing is, so it is a very subtle word too. You know, intention can mean even like moving, when the mind moves, just moves from looking at your table to looking at your lamp. Because it's an experience, there's intention there. Motivation is a little more broad, probably, right? A little more gross, I guess I would say. So yes, so maybe we should use the word motivation. Intention is always there. Intention always driving the mind to something or away from something. So yeah, so the ego is this thing about ignorance, and it always sees the ignorant mind, which I substituted ego there as, or as synonymous with the ignorant mind or ignorance. You know, it paints its own picture onto reality. And then we judge good or bad based on this hallucination and this projection. It makes judgments according to superficial imagination rather than actual reality. Okay, so this is where we go deeply into the whole topic of psychology, which is the main focus of Buddhist thought. And we are going to butt up against the end of the hour, and there's a lot more to talk about. So when Lama was talking about in the book, Ego, Attachment, and Liberation, he has a chapter on mental bureaucracy. And that what the mental bureaucracy, what he means by that is this whole mechanism of how the mind functions, and it functions in a way that's not in accord with reality. Okay, it puts meaning on the external when meaning is really found internally, and this is where we begin to make a shift. The spiritual person, I believe I mentioned last week, the definition of a spiritual person, in my mind, not definition, but yeah, you know, the distinction for me is when we accept that the way to understand reality and happiness and purpose and meaning and joy and fulfillment comes from refocusing back to the we begin focusing, that's an internal experience, and I need to focus there rather than external. Now, the whole ignorant ego mind looks constantly as the answer being out there externally. Okay, and we all do this. And it's not, and even the spiritual practitioner does that. It doesn't mean that, you know, once the spiritual practitioner, just the difference, the demarcation between spiritual practitioner and none is that they say, okay, it is, I know it is, but yet to be able to practice that 24/7 might take lifetimes. But there's the acceptance. There is the acceptance, it's internal. Okay. And then if it's internal, well, how does that work? Then you start investigating these topics like we're talking about today, how the ego actually functions. I think we're at the end of the hour, right, Anna?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So I hope this was helpful. There's so much. You see, an hour is nothing.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
I could stay a little longer, but
I don't know what we have I'll give you, how about we got, what was that, 2 minutes after after the hour? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, how about 3 more minutes?
I'm happy to stay as host. I'm happy to stay for
Okay.
anyone for as long as possible.
Okay, let's go a couple more minutes, and we can also leave time for discussion if you want to. Let's go a little bit more on the ego, because that's okay. So Lama says we need to be skeptical. What that means is stop trusting this belief in if I'm able to get 4 more clients a week, then I can probably afford to get a new car. You see, that's just natural thinking, right? What we want to look at again is what's the belief system behind that. There's nothing wrong with getting 4 more clients and getting a car. Maybe there's nothing wrong. Maybe there's, but it's the belief that then I'll be happy. And of course, none of us say that, right? None of us would say,
Then I'll be happy.
right? I mean, we just don't
Yeah.
say, we don't say it, but we have to be, what Lama's saying, skeptical is really be honest with your motivation. We think then I'll be satisfied. I don't know how to say it. You know, that's what I need to do. And the reason the quote need is because I want to be happy. We don't use those words, granted. So this is where we're going to start being our own psychologists. We have to do this. No one can do it for us. And so it's about checking, always checking. And that's what Lama says, use your brain. Okay, now Lewis and I we agreed, we discovered it's not really the brain, it's the mind, but you know, right now we can use them synonymously, right? You have to have a brain to have a mind anyway. So in the mental bureaucracy, this is all a part of your inner freedom, liberation, and enlightenment. Okay. And okay, so there we go. That's pretty much what I wanted to do today. It was a lot. I have more. You know, what prevents us from all this stuff is this mind that's untrained. That's why we meditate. Now, you want to do mindfulness meditation? Please do, because you're saying, wow, a lot of things Karuna talked about were interesting. I'm not sure they're right. Now I'm going to focus on impermanence because we did a few minutes of it, and I think he's on to something there, right? And we all go, and we're going to meet next week, and everyone's going to focus. They're going to meditate single-pointedly on impermanence, right? Everyone raise their hand because you're going to do this.
Yes.
And
Impermanence.
if you're like me, none of you will be able to do it, right? I mean, I'm projecting onto you, you know, but you know, we'll do it we can do it for a moment or two, and then we're off to the beach, and I got to bring it back in a moment or two, and I need to call my brother, and no, I can bring it back, and then now, you know, but that's okay. By the way, that is perfectly okay, as long as that's perfectly okay. So what you do is you make a decision to focus on the breath, and then you're going to study the impermanence of the mind. And then after about 30 seconds, you're going to realize that you're already cooking dinner in your head, right? Yeah. So then you go, oh, the wandering mind. That's the work. You're doing the right thing. You're not doing the right thing if you don't catch the wandering mind. Okay. But if you're catching that your mind is wandering, that's the meditation. Okay. Don't stop the wandering mind by by rigidity or strictness. Stop the wandering mind by watching it, accepting it, studying it. And then when you study it, I want you to, if you can remember those 4 things about, so the one that starts thinking about cooking down. So I'm meditating on the breath, and in the back of my mind, I'm watching how the mind is just, moves moment to moment. And then all of a sudden, you have the pasta in the pot to see what kind of pasta, like that, right? And then you go, oh, I caught it, wandering mind. So the other thing you can do objectively is, why did your mind go to the pasta? Was because you were seeking comfort, because right now you're bored and it's uncomfortable, like that. So there's no depth to what. So this is excuse me, this is just topic of study, okay? And if you can, go back to some of those little those points. So the job is focus on the breath with a little spy. Focus on the breath, and the breath, focus on the breath for a few minutes. Then turn your attention to the movement of the mind and watching it move. And then there's a little part of your brain watching to see if you wander. It catches the wandering mind. You will wander. That's okay at our level. What your job is to catch the wandering. And you can either bring it back to the breath, or if you don't get lost, just go into those points about, was the mind looking for comfort or pleasure? Was the mind looking for praise? Was it avoiding criticism and blame? Was I going to the pasta because I was looking for more abundance? Or avoiding pain? Okay, something like that. Just find out why were you going to the pasta? What was it looking for? Okay, that's all. That's a huge step, right? That's very different. That's a spiritual practice.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. You guys are great.
Okay.
Any last questions, clarifications?
No,
Good.
I don't think so. That's
Okay.
enough. Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next week, I hope. Same time, same channel. Oh, so traditionally we did last week, I was more disciplined about setting, our motivation in the beginning, like Barbara was alluding, it's motivation, intention, whatever. So as I talked in this hour, intention it determines whether an action is really a spiritual action or a positive action or not. So we didn't really, I kind of messed up on the intention part, but and then what we can do the same thing here. Now we're at the end of the hour and we spent, hour and a few minutes together, and we can dedicate this merit, or, it's a lot like motivation. So we remotivate what this last hour was for, and we can dedicate. I think a great example I mentioned last week is about when you keep putting money into your bank, and then you have a special fund for, to buy a house, or for college education, or just whatever, nest egg, so you have that is intentional. Now you forgot to make that category, so now you make it. And now you say, we dedicate this energy that we spent together, so it doesn't just evaporate into the ether, into our karmic imprints in our mind. Instead, we dedicate it that our own minds can attain, the awakened potential that we possess in potential, and it continues to unfold, and for the sole purpose, really, of our own attainment of freedom and awakening, so that we can use that to benefit all other living beings who don't have the same kind of opportunity. So think for a moment like that. And dedicate the energy, the merits, we call it, the karmic imprints, that the world as we know it will become more and more subdued, peaceful, focused on true meaning rather than fighting or division or greed. That all the beings on the planet are satisfied, they have enough to eat, they have health, they have shelter. All the weapons dissolve into emptiness. And the good heart awakens with every living being. Thank you.
Karuna, can I just ask, so the homework that you want us to do is to watch and observe your mind non-judgmentally?
Yeah, so non-judgmentally. So we start with the breath to get it settled. Some meditations, as you know, are just are breathing meditations, or watching the breath. That's okay. That's good, because that helps center, and that's a fine practice to developing concentration. but I'm not just focusing on that this time. So I want you to get settled and concentrated, and then shift your focus to watching the movement of the mind. In a way, what you can say is the mind impermanent or permanent? And you and intellectually you'll say impermanent, but I want you to go beyond intellect to experience. Okay, Tenzin. So what will happen in watching that movement of the mind is you'll become distracted, probably. So that's the little added point, is catch your distractions. And then probably easier right now, just bring it back to watching the impermanence of the mind, the movement, the rising, abiding, falling away. Rising, abiding, falling away. And if you want, I guess maybe it's too much to ask that if your mind wandered, just to be able to think for a second, why did it go there? What was I looking for? But that might be too distracting. So if you can just do the breath part, watching the movement of the mind, the rising, abiding, falling away, and then the spy catches when you get distracted, and then bring it back to watching the movement of the mind. Powerful, powerful exercise. Is that okay, Kenzie?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
I have one quick question, Karuna.
Yeah.
Are the distractions not the movement of the mind?
You tell me when you come back next week.
Oh,
Okay. And I could answer that. I'm not saying that like some clever guy that, I have an answer, but I think I want to hear your answer, and we'll share that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And Anna, can you make a note that Barbara's going to come back with that?
Barbara.
And Anna,
See you all at week.
can you write down? Can you write down also that Catherine will come back with it, Tenzin will come back, Sean will come back with it, Lewis will come back with it, Yvonne.
Yeah, Louis, Yvonne, Sean, and of course yourself, Karuna.
Of course.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
And me.
Yeah. Okay.
I might be agreeable.
I won't put anyone on the spot. Too much.
know.
Too much.
I know.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karuna.
Bye-bye.